Hi friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. This is part 2 to my Memory of Light spoiler chat, so for the sake of continuity, please go watch part 1 if you're interested in watching this video as a whole, which I will have linked in my description below. This of course got out of hand because are we really surprised? So I've had to split this up into 3 parts. I already knew that I was going to have to split it up, but I think that 3 will be the magic number. And basically I left off after talking about chapter 14, and so I'm going to start off this video by talking about chapter 15 in Memory of Light. So just to give like a very brief recap if you for some reason don't want to watch part 1, I loved the final book in the series. I loved the way that it wrapped everything up, and I did give it 5 stars. So this is generally my positive thoughts, but it's also just the notes that I made while I was reading it, which are pretty in-depth, and I just want to talk to you about basically all of the unhinged thoughts that I had during my experience. So with that said, I'm going to continue on to my thoughts on chapter 15. So in this scene, we had Matt getting into Ibu Dar in the previous time that we saw him, and now we have him basically sneaking into the palace because he wants to try and get back to Tuon. And so he is like entertaining as always. He's being completely ridiculous trying to scale the outside of the palace. But the thing is, having memories there of Tylan, regardless of my personal thoughts on that relationship and how much I didn't like it, having Matt with his thoughts of Tylan does help to bring us back down to earth and to ground the scene, because he has an emotional attachment to this place. And it really is nice in this instance to see, first of all, it's entertaining to see Matt get in and then have to interact with Celicia, but it's also amazing just to see like an actual genuine, normal conversation between the two of them, where they actually interact with each other. I really enjoyed that. And in this chapter, Matt and Tuon are both badasses, and they're very entertaining when they're talking to each other. Like I feel like they're very well matched, and I think they do love each other in their own way after everything they've been through, whatever either of them might say to the contrary at this point in the story. And I just really enjoy them together. And we get a little bit of the relationship between Tam and Rand in this chapter as well, and I just love everything about Tam and Rand. Tam is just such a wise father figure, and while I'm glad that Rand was able to flourish like without his influence for a while, I'm just really glad that Tam is back now and that they're able to be in the same vicinity. Then in chapter 16, I didn't have too much to say, but I definitely thought that it was fitting that the relatively peaceful Ogier are completely formidable when they're finally pushed to violence. They are actually pretty terrifying, and I think that it was really interesting that we got to see this side of them finally in the books. And I also loved in this chapter hearing Rand reflecting on what he remembers from being Lews Therin and what he learned, and at this point I honestly was like, yeah, I think he can kill the Dark One. I think he can do it. And then Lan was impressive as always in this chapter, and I was getting the feeling at this point that Mazrim Taim was going to be a massive pain in the ass for the entire book. And then in chapter 17, I had so much fun watching Matt and Rand finally have a conversation again, and for me it brought to light how really young they are. And maybe Matt always acts like that, as like a little bit of a jokester and like a trickster, but seeing him and Rand together really just hit different in a way, because you could think about what they would have been like before when they were actually just kids, which was only a few years ago. And it's kind of crazy to think about that. But then you have Rand making proclamations about all these hundreds of years of memories that he has, and he is a really interesting mix of both young and old in these moments. And Rand and Tuon are basically like 2 forces of nature, and I appreciate that during this argument they really both felt like they were giving something up and they weren't totally happy, because then in my opinion it's probably closer to being a fair agreement, because if both sides feel like they got ripped off but both sides also feel like they got something that they wanted from the other side, then it's most likely fair. Although I still was hoping there was going to be some resolution for realizing that the Suldam and the Daman are a false system, and an inhumane system. Now, in chapter 18, I made a prediction, and that was that Gawain was going to end up on some kind of suicide mission trying to protect Egwene with his life, but then he ends up dying regardless because of these blood knife rings that he is wearing. And so, in certain ways, that comes true later in the book, but not exactly the way I foresaw it. And then I was thinking about how Cadswan is also a great mentor figure, but she just had a very different style from Moiraine, and in the midst of this series, she kind of took Moraine's place, like not really, not emotionally in Rand's head or heart, but she kind of took over that role as mentor, and he definitely needed some guidance, but I really do think that Rand needed both of them, despite what his feelings towards one or the other might be. And I agreed that Rand should not have risked being trapped by going to the Black Tower himself, and I was just really proud that Two Rivers men were the ones that helped to free them, because the Two Rivers are amazing. And then I noted that there was kind of an odd conversation between Lan and Agelmar about his tactics and his health, and it seems innocent at the time, but I thought it was something to keep an eye on, and I was definitely right about that. And in chapter 19, I liked that we were shown the great generals making some mistakes and not anticipating everything, and said it shows that they're human. And that's an interesting one, because while it does show that they're human, it was very much being taken advantage of in terms of that assumption on the part of people. Instead of immediately assuming that they were under compulsion or something similar. But the initial introduction of that was so slow building, I really think it was so well done. And then I loved the evolving relationship between Egwene and the Wise Ones throughout the course of the series, and the respect that they both have for one another. And then in this chapter, we also find out that there is a plot twist with the seals being fake. And we don't know who took the real ones or where they are. I was thinking that it was potentially one of the Ashaman that was close to Rand before, but who knows? And at this point, we were also watching Matt get some ridiculous ceremonial Shan-Chan clothing, which was very funny. Okay, so in chapter 20, I was talking about how I love watching the Aes Sedai in battle, but at this point, I was basically saying that a massive force of enemy channelers is arriving, and they're obviously on the side of the shadow, but I did not recall ever hearing of the Sharans before. And to be fair, that's probably on me, because once I realized where that land was, I did realize that it had been mentioned before. But this was very sudden and dramatic, in my opinion, their arrival. And at this point, I said that I could not believe that Swan and Brine were dead, and I wondered if it was possible that they could have made a gateway in time to escape. So, hold on to that thought, obviously. But to me, it seemed like this would be the official start of the deaths, because to this point in the book, we really hadn't had any. And at the same time, this was also kind of the official start of Rand's preparations for Shai Ghul, because we actually see them start to travel there with a group of people, and to actually start to like carry out some of these plans. And it's even more stressful now because of the missing seals and not knowing what's going on with those. And at this point, no one else knows that things have gone very, very wrong at Egwene's battlefront because of the Sharans, but I also thought that it was very clever to have Avienda, Elaine, and Min all in different places so that they can feel each other, but none of them were with Egwene, as far as I can remember. And then the first thing that I said in chapter 21 was that while I am glad that Swan and Gareth Brine are not dead, because I really like them as characters, I was genuinely surprised that they were not dead, because like as a result of that, we hadn't had any major character deaths yet. And then after we learned that, we basically headed over to the Black Tower for the rest of the chapter, and we spent some time inside of Lyrel's head, who is an Aes Sedai who has been camped outside of the Black Tower for so long that she basically is holding views that are just outdated for the way that the world is now in the current state of things, because everything has been in so much turmoil and it has changed so much over such a short period of time. And while even recently it may have been normal for Red sisters to express the view that men who can channel would just need to be controlled all the time, it really is gross listening to Lyrel think that way. And basically I loved the interactions here, and the fact that for a character who made his appearance so recently, Andral was really like I was really enjoying him. And I thought that a great quote was, "We fight not to die, but to live." So I forget who said that, to be honest, but I noted it down because I really enjoyed it. And it was at this point, at the start of chapter 22, that I realized that the Sharans must be the people from the other side of the Aiel Waste. Good job, Grace. And I was really not sure about this whole development because I didn't love the idea of a totally unfamiliar group of people being introduced so late in the game with such a massive game-changing force. But I was won over a little bit by the fact that Demandred was leading them, because at the very least, that is someone that we're already aware of. We know that the Forsaken are a problem, and the fact that he has been secretly marshalling this force at least can be explained by the fact that we already knew that he was a piece on the board and an antagonist. And then at this point, we were back visiting Perrin because I was predicting that Perrin will have to call the wolves to the last battle himself, and that they'll fight for the light in the real world, or in the physical world, I guess I should say, rather than the dream. And I was really wondering which Forsaken Heartseeker was and why she was disapproving of the way that Moradin was waging war. But I was thinking that she must be Graendal, because of the fact that earlier Graendal was planning to kill Perrin, except for the fact that he escaped and didn't actually die. But I was really enjoying Lanfear. So we got a lot of the female Forsaken in this chapter, and I was really enjoying Lanfear the way that she was acting, and it didn't mean that I trusted her, because I definitely didn't, but I was just enjoying the scenes that she was in. And then at the end of this chapter, we get to see that Graendal is going after Davram Bashir. And so I was thinking that maybe she was going after all of the great generals. And I don't think I had made the connection yet at this point in my head, but I knew that it was very sinister feeling that she would be going after them. So at this point, I was still feeling like the Sharans, even though they're super intimidating as a force, I still felt like we didn't have enough time for them. And I didn't really end up minding them too much in the end, since they're mostly just there for the battles, but I still couldn't get over my surprise that there was an entire powerful force that was just brought in so late in the game. But one thing I really loved in this chapter was watching Avienda lead the charge into Thakendar herself, and it just shows how far she's come, and I'm so proud of her, and I really hoped that she would live, and I just loved watching her be a leader like that. And one thing that I loved, this is more of a general overarching comment, but this chapter made me think of it, is that I think that a lot of thought and care were put into how battle can be done with the One Power, and it's shown throughout the series a little bit, but it's really showing now, because there's so much fighting in different places that it really needs to not be repetitive. Like, we can't be bored just watching people attack the same exact way with the One Power over and over again, but it wasn't like that. I thought that it was really diverse and that was great. And I was also loving the final interactions between Nynaeve, Moraine, Tom, and Rand, and those three going with him to the cave were so fitting as important figures in his life, and I just love all of those characters. And I also appreciate the fact that there's emphasis that Rand is doing his best, but he still doesn't know if this is the right time to do what he's doing. They're just doing what they know that they have to do, and they're hoping that it's gonna work. And then in chapter 24, we're back with Mat and Tuon, but at this point I was thinking I should probably make an effort to call her Fortuona, even in my own head, because to me she's still Tuon, but of course she's gonna be like Fortuona for the rest of the book. So I was thinking that the two of them were gonna need to join the front lines soon, like with the Shanchan, because it felt so incongruous to have them making preparations and being so far away from any of the battles, as Rand is like literally stepping into the boar. But I did love these scenes. Like, Mat is hilarious, insulting the Shanchan High Blood and just like planning battles and basically being in his element. I unfortunately got cut off by an alarm on my phone, so basically like 10 minutes of me talking was not recorded, which is very sad. But I was just talking about how I thought it was hilarious that Mat was entertaining as always and insulting the Shanchan High Blood, and it was extremely jarring that Fortuona starts to refer to Mat as Notai in her head because she has changed his name, and it's just so jarring because the Shanchan very clearly don't tie their names as closely to their identities as other cultures do, because usually your name is just so intrinsic to your sense of self that it's a very interesting aspect of their culture that they don't seem to have that. It's more tied to position and status, and they can just shed and change names with not too much of a big deal being made about it. And then at this point in the chapter, we got to see a few more different perspectives. So we get to see Lan and his army being tired and overmatched, and the start of that kind of happening. And then we were with Elaine, and I was thinking just about how Elaine is such a strong and complex character, and I really love how many layers she has, and that she is, on top of all of her other great character traits, allowed to just be a feminine woman, and nothing negative is made about that for her. And she really is just so like intelligent and stubborn, and like stands up for herself and can hold her own in any situation, and I just really love Elaine and her development. And then we get to see more of Iturald, and basically that he's very smart, and we get some added depth with him because we see some of his PTSD, and we're allowed to delve a little bit deeper into his head. And just overall at this point, I was thinking that I really liked how every battle felt important and had the weight of emotion behind it, because in my opinion, we had important characters that we care about at every single one of these locations. It's not as though one battle feels like fodder while the others are important. I really cared about what was happening at every one of them. And so in chapter 25, I was thinking about how strong and brave Rand has become, and I had a feeling that their time inside of the cavern was going to pass in hours or minutes, while time outside as you get farther away passes in days or maybe even weeks, and that did turn out to be correct. It is very warped, and it has a sense of unreality about it. And one very interesting thing was that Moradin did not want to just die and be able to be brought back by the Great Lord. He wants to die for good, and he is just tired of enduring existence, which I was a little surprised about, but I found very interesting. And then it was at this point that it became clear to me that Graendal was invading the dreams of the great captains to disrupt them and cause them to start making mistakes. Unless Agelmar was a dark friend, but I really didn't think that he was. And then we got to see a really cool fight in the Wolf Dream between Perrin and Slayer, with the goal of adding that dream spike to outside of the cave mouth, because of the fact that now the Forsaken cannot ambush Rand in the cave. They actually have to come in through the front door, which is a very important advantage. And I thought that Lanfear helping the light in this instance was really important, not because of the specific action or the fact that it's her, but just the fact that I believe it emphasizes that if you choose the shadow, it should be of your own free will, because then at some point in the future, you do have the opportunity to choose the light again, if you choose that of your own free will. Then chapter 26 had an extremely heated discussion between Egwene and Tuon, which was very intense, and I loved that conversation. And I thought it was really interesting, the idea of letting women who can channel choose their own destiny when it comes to the Shan-Chan way of looking at things or the Aes Sedai way of looking at things. And then it's also in this chapter where Davram Bashir is revealed to supposedly be a dark friend who must have been playing an extremely long game, and everyone is understandably shocked about this, and he himself is acting very strange and no longer trustworthy, and this is a huge blow to their army. And then in chapter 27, things were really starting to devolve into chaos, and I was thinking about how I really love Gareth Bryan because he is just so steadfast of a character and very comforting. And in these like joined battlefields, Matt has been very isolated from other characters for quite a while, so I loved to see him just talking with Min. I really like the two of them together and their interaction, and I should have known that Min would somehow get roped into the Shan-Chan because of their view of the importance of omens and the fact that Min has her viewings and how important those could be construed. And then in chapter 28, clearly it had not clicked with me yet that Graendal was the source of these people who were supposedly acting like dark friends, but I was thinking about like how sad it was and how I was really disheartened that important Borderlanders seemed to be dark friends, like Bashir, for example, because of the fact that the Borderlands are so important in protecting the world. And Lan was reasoning it out with Agelmar and obviously didn't want to think badly of him, but comes to the logical conclusion himself, except for the fact that I didn't come to the conclusion somehow that Graendal was responsible for this. I was still baffled by the fact that these people could be dark friends. But then also in this chapter, we got to see some of Min interacting with Fortuona, and we also got to see Matt get back into his battle expertise, which I absolutely love. Okay, so chapter 29, a lot of things about this raising tension through the last few chapters were brought to a head because we learned that Brine is also being messed with by the Shadow, and I was very upset about that. And I felt really bad for Lan and Agelmar because Lan trying to figure out whether Agelmar is making mistakes or leading them into disaster is very stressful, and I feel bad for Agelmar because he clearly can't trust his own mind, and whatever Graendal was doing to their minds was very unsettling. And it was at this point that I realized that it made total sense that with Graendal it would be compulsion, but I didn't realize that it could be done through dreams. And so I kind of get that I didn't fully make that connection because it would be an assumption to assume that it could be done through dreams. But on the other hand, it's very clear that it can be done because of how skillful she is. And I really enjoyed at this point seeing what Matt is seeing on the battlefield versus what Gareth Brine is doing. And so at this point, we know what the cause is. So the tension is between whether Matt is going to be able to save it or not, and the fact that the Shadow does not realize what an important battlefield mind Matt has, but also that Matt wears the Foxhead medallion, so the one power is not going to be able to affect him. And the other thing I really liked from this chapter is that Tuon genuinely trusts Matt and believes him when he tells her that their battlefield is failing and that they need to do something differently, and gives him the freedom to do so. And then in chapter 30, I was very proud of the fact that Perrin and Matt are the two that found out, or figured out anyway, that the battlefield generals are being corrupted, because both of them are very smart. And then at this point, we get to see Rand in the cavern again, and he can sense that time is moving weirdly, and it was very concerning when he touched the darkness and everything goes black. And we also get Logain coming to help Elaine, which was a lifesaver. And in that same savior type appearance on the battlefield for Logain and his crew, I really liked the new strategies that people were coming up with to use the one power to fight, because using streams of lava, opening a gateway to somewhere that can provide you with that, is just extremely smart. It's a way to use not as much power, but to be really effective with it. And then in chapter 31, I was thinking about how the great captains are obviously very trustworthy people, but I was surprised that still at this point, Matt, Perrin, Elaine, and Lan are the only ones that are having serious suspicions and doubts here. And I don't blame Egwene for not wanting to believe that Brine would have this happening to him, but still, she even knows in her own head that the tactics are suspicious and that there are irregularities happening there. And Ituralde seemed to be holding his own the best against his own brain and whatever Graendal was trying to do. But then again, Agelmar didn't see it in himself until it was pointed out to him, so who knows. But the important thing here is that Elias and the wolves got there in time to save Ituralde's battlefield, and that Matt now officially has control of the White Tower's battlefield, and his brain should be incorruptible. So in chapter 32, we have pretty much abandoned the idea of the 4 battlefronts, even though they're still going on. Matt, Egwene, and Elaine are discussing the possibilities for their final stand at the Field of Marilor, and I really did think that the 4 battles were a good idea at first, but Graendal pretty much single-handedly ruined that idea, and honestly, her method of warfare was extremely effective. So in chapter 33, we checked in on Perrin and Slayer, and their fight was getting pretty desperate. And then we also checked in on Fael, which is good because the horn, I'm sure, will soon be very important, and Matt will need to be there to blow it. And so we'll have to have that be in the right place at the right time for when that needs to happen. But then of course we have Fail and her caravan being sent to the wrong place by a gateway, and the question is whether the Aes Sedai meant to do it or whether she was pierced by one of those spikes from the bubble of evil and it warped the intention of her gateway. That was a possibility that I thought of, even though it's never actually brought up in the book. And we know that Fail and company are in trouble, and hopefully they can survive out in the middle of the Blight. But we move to Aviendha now, and there are some seriously intense things going on with her. But we know from her perspective that all 4 of the great captains are in custody now, but she's now facing off against these dark Aiel, and they are extremely unsettling as well. And I think the most heartbreaking thing about it is that the Aiel sending away men who can channel has become this. There's great intent behind it, but they have been warped and twisted into tools of the Dark One. But Cadswan comes to the rescue because she is sneaky and smart and wouldn't just leave without an investigation, and so she saves Aviendha, which is, of course, amazing. But these scenes and these battles are definitely becoming more and more important as we go. And then in chapter 34, we have Rand facing the Dark One in a place that doesn't exist and is outside the pattern, and it's necessary even though it's hard to make sense of it. And so I always find things like this really interesting in fantasy because they're the descriptions of things that by necessity are outside of human understanding because they just don't exist, but we're trying to evoke them anyway in the form of this book. And then also in this chapter, we see how rough of a situation Fail and her caravan are in, and we also see more of Graendal and her compulsion, and she just disgusts me so much. I absolutely hate watching her do that to people. So in chapter 35, we get some of Oliver's perspective, and I found it pretty sad in a way because he just wants to be protected, but also useful and needed. But he also has the perspective of a young boy where he has the naivety of thinking that he could face a Trolloc, and I just know that if they get into a bad situation, I just want him to be safe, and I don't want him to try and put himself in a more dangerous situation. And then at this point, Fail thinks someone is after the horn, so she sets a trap, and she eventually catches Harnan and Bannon in it. And I was genuinely shocked at this point because I couldn't believe they were dark friends. I genuinely didn't think that they were, but I couldn't think of a way around it in the situation. And I was wondering why they never tried to harm Mat, and that I really hoped that Fael still had the real horn, and basically just really stressed out because of how important the horn likely would be. And then chapter 36 is the last chapter before the 200-page chapter. And so in this one, we follow a few characters once again. So we see Nynaeve inside of the cave, and I really enjoyed this exploration of the fact that she's doing her best to help because that's who she is, but in this moment, she's basically helpless, and Nynaeve hates that. And then you also have Mat organizing the common people who want to fight just because they know that everyone will fight if they can. And they are being trained by Mat as soldiers rather than individual fighters so that they'll actually have a chance to make a stand. And we just get to see a little bit more of various combinations of the Emmonsfield Five interacting with each other, and it makes me so happy. Mat and Egwene are both awesome, and seeing them interact with each other just makes me so happy. And I love watching Mat be in command. In a way, this really just feels like the calm before the storm. And so I know that this is a little bit of an anticlimactic finishing point, but this is a good place to stop, and chapter 37 onward, from the last battle onward, will be the final part of this video, so I'm going to stop here for now. So if you are still here, thank you so much for listening to all of my word vomit, but there are just so many things that happen and so many details that it's so impressive that a book like this can even be written and have all of the details be juggled so well. It's honestly impressive, and one of the reasons why I think that Brandon Sanderson was a perfect choice to write the final 3 books of this series, just because there was so much to be juggled and so many plots to be woven together. But that is where we're at for now. And the next time we meet and I post a video, we will be starting with chapter 37, The Last Battle. So with that said, that is it for this one. Please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. Along with the final part of this video, I post new videos every Monday and Thursday. And as always, I will have my Discord, socials, and Patreon linked in the description below if you're interested in any of that stuff. And with that said, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!